Hey everybody, I'm Scott Allen Miller. Today on Sam IT, we're going to tackle one of those more detailed and in the weeds problems. Sometimes we get to tackle big concepts and talk about things that matter to everyone all the time. Sometimes we need to talk about vendors and really specific things. And today, I want to talk about one of those, and that is specifically Microsoft's Windows Server, its client access licenses, or CALs, and why this makes sense for you and why you should be happy about it. This is specifically an area that I hear people complain about all the time. People will tell me that Microsoft licensing is complex, and we tackled that in a different video, or they will say that it's expensive, or that it's just insane. I hear this one a lot, that people actually use the word insane. Now this is weird because in reality Microsoft licensing is both common sense and straightforward in nearly all cases, and it certainly is in the case we're talking about here. So why do people feel it's insane? Honestly, I can't answer that. That's one that blows my mind. But we need to understand why we like client access licenses. Now, first of all, we're going to ignore device licensing. Device licensing is a little bit more complex because you have to kind of figure out where all your devices are. It generally doesn't make sense for you. It's a special case, mostly for warehouses and manufacturing companies. It is worth mentioning that it exists and you can consider it, but it doesn't matter to the vast majority of companies. You're going to use user CALs, which are far simpler. In order to price out what you need for your Windows, you need to figure out how many workloads you're going to have, how many VMs you need to run, how many systems it's going to run on, and how many cores those are going to have. Unfortunately, there's just a certain amount of capacity planning that you have to do when figuring out what things are going to cost. If you're buying a fleet of cars, you have to know how many passengers you need to be able to carry at a time, how many different vehicles they're going to go in, and how many places you're going to store them. These are just basics. There's no getting around this. So unfortunately, it doesn't matter that this is Windows or something else. You need to have basic capacity information about what you're going to be deploying. That said, this stuff is all extremely basic and very easy to figure out for the most part. Workloads can get a little bit confusing because you may need to figure out, are you going to have high availability workloads? Is it going to be disaster recovery workloads? Is it simply going to be rapid backup? Things like that. But in general, you know how many workloads you have, and you can figure out how many VMs you're going to need very quickly and easily. The other piece, and surprisingly the piece that people get more frustrated and confused about, is the client access licenses. This is easy. Count up the number of people who work in your organization. If you have people who work in your organization who have absolutely no need to use computers, okay, you can discount them. If your janitor, for example, never logs in to any system anywhere, they don't use a door key, they don't use a time clock, they use absolutely nothing that touches your computers, okay, they are allowed to be an employee who does not have a user CAL. Beyond that, your users need CALs. This is how it works. If you want to have Windows on your network, you need to have users licensed for it. In some extreme case, you may have a business where somebody doesn't rely on the Windows infrastructure anywhere in the system and still uses a completely non-Windows computer, blah, blah, blah. That's a theoretical edge case, and if you are that extreme, you probably know about it. And even in that case, it's probably worth licensing that person just because. But it doesn't matter. You count up your number of users, basically the number of employees and any contractors in the organization, and this may sound a little bit complicated, but it's not. Your company knows how many people it employs, whether it's 5 or 5,000. This isn't hard. Simply get that count and buy that many user CALs. That's it. Now, the reason that we love user CALs is because they make things, one, easy. It doesn't get easier than counting up the number of people you have. It really doesn't. But the second piece is even more important. It makes it cheap. You heard me. CALs are what makes Windows cheap-ish. Windows would cost a lot more if you didn't have CALs. Why, you ask? Because every single workload would have to be priced as if you were getting the maximum possible utility out of it. That means companies with hundreds of thousands of employees, the rate that they have to pay at is what you would have to pay at, because Microsoft would have no way to charge differently if they didn't use something like CALs or something more complex than CALs. CALs keeps this easy in a way where it's very hard for you to cheat the system. It's very hard for you to completely abuse them and find a way to get loads and loads of Microsoft resources for very little money. It's not perfect, but it's as close as perfect as you can get without going to a ridiculous amount of effort. CALs are brilliant. They make sense, especially given the types of workloads that Windows servers tend to run. They tend to be heavily user-focused, so counting up the number of users is incredibly simple. The one thing that I kind of wish they would do is go from having server licensing at all and go to pure CAL licensing. But there's reasons why they don't do that, because there's a lot of businesses where you might run just unbelievable loads of Windows servers for 5 people, and at some point they need to be paying more than a normal 5-person accounting firm might be paying. So the blend that Microsoft has makes sense. I've never found a scenario where it significantly had outliers that were so far out that it seemed like it didn't make sense. Sometimes that company of 110 people who use servers really heavily versus the one with 100 people who use it really lightly are too close in cost and you feel that they're not paying what they should be. Okay, but it's tiny, tiny tweaks. The numbers basically work. But it's important for you to understand that if you didn't have CALs, you would have to pay so much more in order to use those systems. The CALs only hurt the very, very largest company using the system. So unless you have hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of users, it's not you. And those companies are getting enterprise licensing agreements and are probably getting a good deal anyway. The other piece is that quite often I hear people say that Microsoft is so expensive. And while the raw cost might be high, there's something very important we need to understand. And that is, if you are deploying Windows, presumably, and if you haven't done this, you need to do this, or someone does, you need to evaluate, does the cost of Windows or the Microsoft product in question justify the cost of buying it? If it does, if the value that you're getting from the product you're buying from Microsoft is so great that it's worth paying for, then it's not an expensive product, and you can never say it's an expensive product. You can only say it was an adequate value that we were willing to pay for. Or, in some cases, we got a steal because we're getting such great use out of it, and we only have to pay the average. But no matter how you look at it, if you are choosing to use Microsoft products, you must have done, you are responsible for having done the decision process to determine if their cost makes sense for you. And loads of companies do this, and loads of companies decide that they do make sense, and that's why you find Windows in so many places, because Microsoft delivers a lot of value for what you pay for. If for any reason you do not see this value, if you feel your product is expensive in any way, if you feel the licensing is insane in any way, what your brain is telling you is that you have the wrong product, or you don't understand its value and someone else made the decision. But this is really important because people come up with this all the time. Well, this price is insane. Well, then don't use it. You have lots of other options. Well, I have to use it. Nope, but that's never a possibility. You never have to use Windows. Now, someone in your organization may have decided that you had to use Windows, but as an organization, you never have to use Windows or any other Microsoft product. It is always an option, no matter what. It may be a very tough option to get away from. It may have lots of value that you can't justify not using. For example, your clients require that you use it for some reason, and it's not worth dropping those clients. That is in no way the same as must use it. That is simply that the value of it is so high to you. Why your customers demand that you use it and spend all that money, nobody knows. But that's a separate issue with you and them. As far as keeping them as a client, if it's worth it, and that's what it takes, you have justified the price. Period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. This is the open market. You're allowed to buy these products or not buy these products as you want. If your organization feels they are expensive, it needs to reevaluate why it is buying things it sees as expensive when alternatives exist. Even if alternatives didn't exist, there's always the alternative of not doing the thing. As long as it's worth buying the product, it's not expensive to you if you've done a proper decision process. So, the two things I want you to take away from this video is, one, the quote-unquote complexity of server and CAL licensing for Windows is not complex and in your interest. It's what keeps your price reasonable. And two, if you're buying these products or any vendor like this, and your organization sees it as so valuable that it must pay for it, you cannot have the emotional reaction of saying it is expensive or insane or anything like that. You may personally feel that way because you don't want to pay for it. That's fine. This is not about your personal feelings. This is about what's best for the business and what has a return on investment, ROI. The fact that it has a high TCO up front, that may be useful in looking at how the ROI plays out, but it doesn't change the fact that somebody believes the ROI is so high that you are going to deploy it. And if you're the person watching this video, it's a very high chance that that person is you. So do that math before you go down the path of buying anything. Figure out what the alternatives are, weigh your options like you're always supposed to do, and if it comes out that Microsoft products are so valuable that you can't look at alternatives, then rejoice, you're getting a deal. Thanks for joining me. Remember to like and subscribe, and as always, you can sponsor us here on Patreon. With the link will be down below, and you can discuss Microsoft and licensing and all costs and all those things in the thread. And remember, if you're using Microsoft and you found so much value from it, that leaves you even more resources that you can put into Patreon to help sponsor our educational efforts here.
Discover how easy and affordable business telephone service can be. Say it with Talkadillo.